Welcome to another episode of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. A progressive and populist insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining show on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people, and not just the elite few. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters from his mid-Michigan attic, it's time for the award-winning Pat Johnston. It's all yours, Pat.
Yeah! Welcome to another edition of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and can I just say that I don't care about Greenland? I don't. Seriously, who the hell has ever given one thought about Greenland, ever? I mean, I guess unless you're there, or lived there, or come from there, but I mean, the only time I think of Greenland is whenever I watch The Beatles' A Hard Day's Night, when a press member asks John Lennon, how did he find America? And John responds, turn left at Greenland. I mean, that's the only time I really ever thought about Greenland. I mean, we've got a K-shaped economy right now in this country where the few billionaire oligarchs are doing quite well, but yet the majority of the working class is dealing with rising costs of food, of electricity, of housing, of childcare, of car insurance, and health care. Not to mention billions of dollars spent on an ICE Gestapo beating up, kidnapping, and shooting people in American streets. And I'm supposed to suddenly care and back dear leader's idiotic dream of taking over Greenland at the price of $700 billion? Now, of course, dear leader Trump is saying, we, America, we take over your country, which is kind of against, I thought, what we were all about in World War II. I don't know. Of course, NATO is pushing back, and considering how much the European Union owns over $8 trillion in American stocks, bonds, and debt, I don't know, but this sort of seems insane to me. And perhaps that's why a large majority of Americans are against us taking over Greenland. And hey, what do you know? It appears dear leader's pushing for this Greenland takeover because, yes, he's doing the bidding for billionaire tech bros. Greenland is rich with rare earth minerals that electronic devices and AI need to operate, and that's why people like Jeff Bezos from Amazon or Bill Gates have shown some strong interest in having America taking over Greenland. And listen to this story from Yahoo Finance, and I'm quoting here, beyond mining, Greenland has also attracted interest as a testing ground for crypto-native governance and financing models. Peter Thiel, a longtime Trump ally, has backed Praxis. This startup, led by CEO Dryden Brown, aims to establish a so-called network state. Praxis has publicly explored Greenland as a potential site and raised more than $525 million to develop a new city built around reduced regulation and tokenized real-world assets, positioning the island as the frontier for crypto-enabled urban development. Wow, isn't that just wonderful? See, it's not about security. No, it is about enriching the oligarch. The tech bros. That's the story. That's what this is all about. It's not about American security against China, against Russia. No, it's about how to make billionaire tech bros like Peter Thiel, who bankrolled J.D. Vance, even more powerful. So we're willing to fork over probably around $1 trillion when all is said and done to take over Greenland for the tech bro oligarch. That's how your tax dollars would be spent. Now, while in Davos, Switzerland here this week for the World Economic Forum, that's essentially a who's who of corporate authoritarian capitalists who profess to care about the working class, but is really just a front to keep the powerful gaining more wealth. Dear leader said that he's reached a deal all of a sudden with Greenland, but he just couldn't release the details, right? I've heard that one many times before. Now, he says he's called off his ridiculous tariffs against NATO countries that were against the U.S. taking over of Greenland. Now, what I really think happened, everyone, is that some billionaire banksters told the regime that the European Union would call out our debt and we'd be screwed. But isn't it strange? Isn't it strange how one day dear leader calls for these big-time tariffs on these countries, which sends the markets tumbling, and then the next day he calls off the tariffs, which sends the markets soaring. Seems like some people there know how to play the short game, and some are making millions and billions of dollars. Regardless, there's no real deal yet, whatever that would be. But make no mistake, this is about enriching the billionaire class, the same oligarch class that it appears the Trump regime's Department of Justice is protecting by continuing to stall the release of the Epstein files. I mean, just remember, it was only a week ago when Dear Leader visited Michigan and a union auto worker called him a pedophile protector by slowing down the release of the Epstein files. And that, above anything else I can remember, that really got under Trump's skin, and so he flipped off that worker in Dearborn and told him to F off. And I love what our good friend John King from Michigan Advance had to say about that little incident, and I'm quoting here. He said, "That moment, crude, unpresidential, and unmistakable, cut through weeks of both sides' noise and strategic silence. In one exchange, the country saw the same man it has seen for nearly a decade, thin-skinned, angry at accountability, and hostile to anyone who challenges him, especially working people." Absolutely right there, John King. He has never won with the working people. And of course, Ford suspended that worker because they showed more reverence and more fealty to a guy who's blocking the release of the files, since they'll expose a lot of his friends, according to what former MAGA Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says Dear Leader told her. It's always about protecting the powerful. It's always about protecting the untouchable class, while at the same time attacking and brutalizing the working class. And in Michigan, we're seeing that happen as MAGA State House Speaker and Dear Leader Trump groupie Matt Hall sued to stop the state from spending millions on work spending projects, wigs for kids with cancer, suicide prevention, and more. And this was money that was already approved, and Republicans decided to block it. And sadly, a court last week decided to block the state from spending that already approved money. On top of that, Matt Hall and State House MAGA Republicans are promising that there will be a leaner budget this year as revenues are dropping. Part of that reason, by the way, for revenues dropping is because of cuts in federal spending for healthcare, like Medicaid and food stamps. So isn't that nice? But Matt Hall showed his true self this week. And to tell you the truth, I'm surprised it took him this long to go on the attack against the RxKids program. This is a program, of course, if you listen to the show, that we've talked extensively about here. And it's a program championed by Dr. Mona Hanna, the doctor who helped publicize the Flint water crisis and who's now the RxKids director. Now, this program provides expecting moms in cities and towns across the state with $1,500 and then $500 each month during the baby's first year, a pro-life program. And it started in Flint, where it's already seen success, such as it lowered rates of maternal postpartum depression, stabilized families' housing, and improved infant outcomes, and is saving millions of dollars in NICU spending or neonatal care. That is a success story. Now, it was first funded by federal pandemic money, but then became a private, publicly funded program with the state providing some of that public money. And listen to this, just listen to this. Research is showing that for every $1 spent from the RxKids program, an estimated $1.60 to $3 circulates in the local economy. So it's not just helping kids. It's just not helping families. It is helping local economies. And believe me, we desperately need that in many local municipalities across the state. And the best part of this program is that it's not means tested, which also means no needless paperwork, which means needing less staff to do such busy work. That's good. Now, the program is expanded to both urban and rural towns and cities across the state. And the statewide budget for this program has expanded to now over $200 million from an overall state budget of $81 billion. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's not taking up much of the state budget, and we're getting more bang for our buck. But MAGA House Speaker Matt Hall is ready to attack the program because of undocumented immigrants. Of course, whenever in doubt, that's their boogeyman. I mean, the scapegoats for everything. The white Christian nationalists, capitalists like Matt Hall will always try to paint as the real villains. No, not the billionaire class. No, it's undocumented people. Now, he told the Detroit News, and this is a quote, RxKids is a way to pay illegal aliens to have children located in Michigan, which then puts the illegal alien families to the front of the line in immigration. I mean, now, wait a second. I thought MAGA Republicans were about being pro-life. I mean, I can tell you that during my days working in corporate right-wing talk radio, I heard from many callers through the years that life is sacred. Life is sacred. Don't mess with life. And the most important agenda of them all is a pro-life agenda. Unless the kids are born from undocumented citizens, I guess, because, that's what Jesus thought. But is there evidence that RxKids puts undocumented families to the front of the immigration line? Is there, Matt? Really? Show the evidence. Show the evidence. I mean, whatever it takes to make working class families suffer even more. Whatever it takes, right, Matt? Now, that quote from Matt Hall was from a story by the Detroit News' Beth LeBlanc, who wrote how the money provided to these moms is dispersed by a New York philanthropy group that deals with these kinds of cash transfers. It's been doing it for a number of years. RxKids never hid the fact that this group called Give Directly will dish out the money to communities across the state. I mean, did we really think the money just flowed to communities without actually thinking about how we were giving out that money? I didn't think that. I knew it was being doled out one way or another, and somebody had to get compensated for it. Now, as Beth LeBlanc reported, and I have to tell you, the story was insightful. Michigan State University gets taxpayer dollars, applies an administrative fee, and then directs the cash to this nonprofit called Give Directly, which charges also a 10% administrative fee for handling RxKids payment. Now, look, I'm all about reporting how and where taxpayer money goes. I'm fine with that. That's great. But in the large scheme of things, I'm not losing my mind over this, since the money has to be handed out in a systematic way, and that means someone will have to get paid for handling that process. It's common sense. And notice how Matt Hall went right to attacking undocumented citizens. Sure, he expressed some concern over this administrative fee, but that's not going to move the needle, considering how well the RxKids program is helping working class families in these communities and also the communities where they live. I mean, this is why Detroit Mayor Mary Sheffield announced that the city will soon take part in the program, because it is working. I'm sorry, but as Lansing politicians on both sides of the aisle, including Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer, pushed for huge tax breaks and huge incentives for big tech bros and their data centers to sprout across Michigan with hardly any oversight, it's really hard for me to get all bent out of shape over a 10% administrative fee for a program costing over $200 million that will actually improve lives. A data center isn't going to do that. RxKids actually is. But you guys get the game here. I mean, whatever it takes for the corporate class to punish poor black, brown, and white folks just so they can claim more money for themselves. Just so they can point to those people and say, they're losers. Yeah, sure, you may become one of them soon because we're just one layoff, one firing away from being just like them. But no, you're supposed to look at them with disdain. See, it's all about dividing the working class. And ask Matt Hall, as he and his party is blocking that $640 million in already approved spending for work projects across the state, ask him, why are MAGA Republicans blocking spending to create more transparency for their precious for-profit private charter schools, which have wasted hundreds of millions of dollars in the state with very little oversight? Hey, we're not going to talk about that at all, are we? No. You see, those are the donors. They're donors. We're not going to touch them. We're going to go after poor black, poor brown, and poor white folks. Look, I'm sorry, but this is just another way for corporate MAGA Republicans to take more money away from helping hardworking families here in Michigan and then funneling that money to the corporate class. That is always their game. Also, it's their way of attacking childcare or free childcare in this country. I mean, that's what we saw from those MAGA propagandist videos by that guy named Nick Shirley. He claimed to have uncovered some massive fraud in Minnesota's childcare system. Now, his propaganda video turned out to be a lie, but it not only led the Trump regime to hold up or block federal funding for childcare, but because these Nick Shirley videos attacked child care facilities that were being run by Somali Americans, it led to the regime's ICE Gestapos terrorizing of Minneapolis and then led to the killing of Renee Good. That's just me. I'd rather much spend my money on helping new families and providing more childcare than spend my money on, say, a fascist ICE Gestapo filled with white supremacists. Hey, but, that's me. Joining me in a moment to talk more about the MAGA propaganda machine and the MAGA billionaire takeover of CBS News is longtime Chicago journalist and now media critic with a Substack called Indistinct Chatter, Jennifer Schulze. She's coming up here to share her thoughts on these topics and much more. You are listening to LOL.
You're listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Have you ever heard Pat's lectures on why desserts with fruit aren't really desserts? Or why the 70s produced the greatest movies of all time? I have. So be happy you're just hearing him rant about politics. If you'd like to contact Pat about politics or debate how cocoa is technically a fruit, send a message to leftoflansing@gmail.com. Here's Pat Johnston.
Just want to send a quick thanks to Audio Boom for platforming the show, so it's available wherever you get your podcast, and please give it a good 5-star review as well. And if you ever need to reach me to talk about the show or anything I said, or maybe something I didn't say, you can always email me. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Jennifer Schulze is a longtime Chicago journalist and is now a media critic, and you can read her insightful and accurate analysis on how the corporate news is covering or not covering or covering up the authoritarianism that is quickly taking over the country under Substack called Indistinct Chatter. Jennifer joined us last year, and I just thought as we just passed here the first year since the Trump regime regained power that we should invite Jennifer back on the show to get her takes on where the corporate media is failing the working class and, of course, also democracy. And if you've listened to the show here ever since I started a few years ago, you know that I always like to talk about media coverage, and I offer my side of media criticism since I got my degree in it. I feel like I should use it once in a while. So, like you heard last week with my interview with Jeff Smith of the Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy, because we were talking about local media coverage in West Michigan and how it covers or doesn't cover the local oligarchy there. So I am grateful that Jennifer Schulze is taking a little time out of her busy schedule to talk with us here this week. Jennifer, welcome back to the podcast, and I hope that you're keeping warm in the Chicago area as we are here in Michigan.
Hi, Pat. Thank you. Happy New Year. Thank you for having me back. And so far, we're hanging in there. Today's not nearly as bad cold-wise as it's been, but it's Chicago, so we're used to it.
I know, and obviously being surrounded by the lakes here in Michigan, we know exactly what you guys go through there in Chicago weather-wise. All right, so I like talking about when I introduced you, I said that you were a longtime Chicago journalist, and then you kind of turned into more of a media critic. Was that something you just kind of started doing, or were you always a media critic even when you were a journalist?
No, when I worked as a reporter, a producer, a news director, a manager, all those kinds of things, you do your best when you're inside the institution to try to make it better. And I'm sure I'd call it a critic role, but you're always looking at what you're doing and trying to figure out if you're meeting the needs of the community that you're serving. That's a little bit different role. But when I left the everyday work world of media, I took a little bit of time off and I was watching from my home. I was puzzled by a lot of the things I was seeing starting in 2016 and after that, just about all the things we all know so well about how the media has and hasn't covered Trump. And I was just struck by something. And I thought, I'm just going to write this down. I have thoughts about this and I'm going to write it down. And I've been doing that for a few years. And, I come from broadcast news mostly. I have worked at newspapers and digital sites, but most of my experience is as a broadcaster. And I think some interesting things about how that business runs or doesn't run. And I've tried to bring some of my experience to that. I also am very much a local news person. And I think that there's a tendency to talk about the media as like this gigantic, I don't know what, huge force, but then nothing specific about it. And I think there are a lot of very different elements in the media, and local news is one of those things. And I'm a big proponent of local news. I think local news is absolutely invaluable. Here in Chicago, the local news has done a remarkable job covering ICE being here for the last year. I am so proud of all the different broadcast, print, and digital outlets that have covered that locally. It's just been so impressive. So I spend a lot of time talking about local news, and I don't think a lot of people who do quote unquote media criticism do that. They tend to look at the bigger pictures. And Pat, I talk about that too. I wrote something today about CBS News. But that's a little bit about how I got here and how I think about it.
Right. And I think that's good to also be focusing on the local aspect. I think you heard in my intro, I talked with a gentleman last week, and that's kind of what he does as well, amongst so many other things that he does out there in West Michigan. But he likes to look at local news, what they're covering, maybe what they're not covering. I think one thing that I've noticed with local news, especially where I am here in mid-Michigan, and of course I think you're aware about how this is happening throughout the country, is maybe the lack of local news and how that's kind of drying up in many areas, including rural areas as well.
Oh, absolutely. I will say the Chicago area is really lucky in that regard, and I don't think we've been hit nearly as hard. That's not to say there haven't been massive layoffs and closures and all of that, right. But we still have a somewhat robust local media situation here compared to a lot of the other country. I can't say that for the rest of the state that I live in or the surrounding states. Local news, the news desert thing is a real problem. And the domination too of, for example, with local television stations, the fact that Sinclair owns so many local TV stations now is really, I don't like it. And I don't like the fact that Nexstar is poised to, they already have too many and they're about, it looks like, to get more. Mm-hmm. So there are still lots of problems with local news. But for Chicago, I think we're doing okay, better than a lot of places.
You mentioned ICE and being in Chicago, that was last year. I was wondering if you could talk about what you saw in Chicago when ICE was there compared to what we're now seeing in Minneapolis. I assume that you're seeing flashbacks.
Oh, yes. And I'm watching Minneapolis like a lot of us are very closely. It's just horrifying what's happening up here. A couple of things, ICE was here with Dr. Phil. It was absolutely abhorrent last January to kind of kick things off. And it was a made-for-TV, live TV spectacle of a few days. Dr. Phil's going on these ride-alongs and they're grabbing people in the middle of the night and it's all being broadcast live on his cable channel or his, whatever he has. And it was just absolutely horrible. And they were here for a little bit, but I think it was too cold for them, so they left. And then they came back. They would pop in and out. And some people say they never really left. But then they came back in the fall. The estimates are between 250 and 300 agents, and they were here really aggressively for 6 weeks. And that was just incredible because you didn't know where they would be or when they would show up or how they would show up. And they would be in these caravans racing down quiet neighborhood streets in the suburbs, in the city, in neighborhoods where I live. They were, like getting kids coming out of school, or maybe they were looking for their parents. And so my neighbors and my family, we were suddenly doing, school watch in morning and evening and things like that. And the local news did a really good job of covering it. The difference between what happened here in Chicago and Minneapolis is the scale. Minneapolis started with about 100 agents there in December. They left from Chicago, went to a couple places, and then found their way up to Minneapolis. They started with about 100 agents in Minneapolis in December. And by the end of December, or beginning of January, I should say, they were up to about 2,400. Now they might be over 3,000. And everybody knows that Chicago is substantially larger than Minneapolis, right? We had up to 300 ICE agents here. 300. There are now over 3,000 in the city of Minneapolis. I cannot even imagine. Everyone here was terrified because, like I said, you did not know where they would be when they would show up. You just expected that these giant SUVs could come roaring down your street anytime. In Minneapolis, I think that is happening all day, every day in a jillion different places. I can't even fathom it. Really, it is just absolutely terrifying. And like here, I think that the vigilant residents have their cameras up. You know, our governor said early on, have your cameras up, document everything that they do. And then we found that those videos of what ICE was doing made it into the news media and on social media. And then they found their way into federal court in Chicago. And they were very valuable in various court cases in Chicago about ICE and how ICE was treating the protesters here. That same thing is happening in Minneapolis. The local news coverage is outstanding. The local residents have their cameras up, videoing everything. And what we are seeing, I'm sure you agree, is horrific. Horrific.
Yeah, horrific. And sometimes I feel like horrific's not even...
No, right. It's not strong enough.
No. And, you know, maybe we can just then move this into a piece that you wrote, I think it was last week, on Indistinct Chatter that people can read on that Substack. And it was on how that MAGA propagandist operative, political operative, Nick Shirley's disinformation propaganda videos on child daycare center fraud in Minneapolis essentially led to ICE showing up and essentially then led to the death of Renee Good, who was shot by ICE agent Jonathan Ross. Can you explain maybe how you were able to come to that conclusion on how those videos did lead to that tragic shooting, and also talk about how his work was really about being a political operative and not being a journalist?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, there were 100 agents in Minneapolis for about 3.5, 4 weeks in December. On December 26th, Nick Shirley, who is this young goofball of a guy, but has done some really inflammatory videos. I mean, he even went into CCOT. I mean, he's done some stuff on Ukraine. He's done a lot of really nasty stuff in New York on immigrants. He posted this video alleging a scam at daycare centers in Minneapolis. And I'm going to guess most people have either heard of it or God forbid, seen it. Don't watch it. I watched it. Don't watch it. Everything about it is a lie. It's disgusting. He tries to actually break into facilities. He's grabbing doors. And I just want to stop and say, anybody who's had kids or has watched the news knows that schools and daycare centers are trying to protect the children and the staff inside from outsiders. I think we've forgotten here for a moment about school shootings and why there is security in place at these places. He made it as if that was proof of a crime, that he couldn't just walk in to the daycare center and see the kids. The whole thing is absolutely vile. But what struck me about it and why I wanted to write about it was he's sort of cosplaying a journalist. You know, he's trying to make it look like it's legit by using a lot of the mechanisms that actual journalists use, right? Mm-hmm. You know, he's walking and talking in the camera and he's doing interviews and everything, but all of it's off. It's not accurate to begin with, and that's the most important thing. And it's also really shoddily done, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. But what I thought was really interesting about it is that MAGA media grabbed it instantaneously. I mean, I think within just a couple of hours, the vice president of the United States was sharing the video on social media, as was Elon Musk. It just lit MAGA on fire. And then it also exploded into regular media. And within a couple of days, I was seeing all these stories about how the Trump administration was responding to it. Kristi Noem, we're going to send 2,000 agents. The FBI director, we're going to send all these people. We're going to do all these things. They cut off all this funding from various programs to Minnesota. And then the mainstream media was starting to do feature stories on Nick Shirley, like, you know, meet Nick Shirley, the guy who prompted this occupation of Minneapolis. And I saw a headline that called him a MAGA journalist. And I was like, hold up. There is no such thing as a MAGA journalist. MAGA is based on lies. Journalism is based on truth. And I was sort of struck by how I just didn't feel like, even though this is not new, I mean, this guy is like this generation of James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, who, you know, was doing these kind of gotcha videos for years.
Right.
It's not a new technique, but I feel like sometimes we don't take it seriously and understand how interconnected it is to the politics in the country now and how this MAGA media infrastructure works. You know, calling him a MAGA journalist is not true. But really, my theory is he's a political operative. He may not work for the Trump administration, but he works for the Trump administration. And they used it as cover to launch this political attack on Minneapolis. Now, I don't know if there would be 3,000 ICE agents in Minneapolis today if Nick Shirley had not done that video, but I think it might have unfolded differently. People were hysterical. There was this terrible thing happening in Minneapolis because this 24-year-old with a reputation for telling lies on YouTube said so. And I was just dumbfounded by that.
Jennifer, you are right now that I think about it too, because this whole propaganda video / story, it kind of really picked up steam around the holidays. And I'm wondering, maybe, is that why there wasn't a whole lot of pushback initially, or at least some kind of investigative work by the media? I mean, I used to work at a radio station for many years, and I can tell you that when it was holiday season, there would be a lot of people who would choose that time to take their vacation, and our stations would be kind of low on staff for that week or week and a half, what have you. Do you think that's why there wasn't really any real pushback at first? Also, maybe you can correct me, but I seem to think that it was really CNN that finally decided to do some kind of story or expose on this Nick Shirley, because there was a lot of people like us saying, who the hell is this Nick Shirley guy? And finally, CNN decided to dig in a little bit and find out exactly what he was all about. Am I wrong about that?
For sure, it was strategically released on a dead news day, the day after Christmas.
Yeah.
It was a Friday leading into a weekend. So you would say that entire time, those 3 days, where there was no news. So that definitely was on purpose, and that definitely gave it more attention than it might have gotten. But there's this MAGA media infrastructure is very sophisticated and not. They all join together on the dime. Man, they are there. As soon as something happens, it's like the bat signal goes out. And then suddenly everyone's sharing it, and it overpowers these algorithms, and it's everywhere. And frankly, by the time something like that, has gone around the world, regular media is just starting to wake up and say, maybe we should fact check this. I will say that the local media in Minneapolis very quickly was getting right on it. They were going to daycare centers, and they were in person going, hey, something's not right about this. And they were looking at the security camera videos and interviewing people at the daycare centers. And then the Inspector General in Minnesota went to all these things. And everything that he said was disproved in a really unfortunate way. It didn't matter. There was a truth out there that a lot of people wanted to believe or did believe, and whether Trump believed it or not, his administration used it as an excuse to do what they're doing in Minneapolis. Like I said, I'm not sure what's happening in Minneapolis wouldn't have happened already, because, he's been after Minneapolis like he's been after Chicago for a long time. Blue city, blue state, didn't vote for him. He doesn't like the governor. He doesn't like our governor. He doesn't like the mayor of Minneapolis. He doesn't like the mayor of Chicago. There's a lot of similarities, but the brute force is much more than we saw here in Chicago. We saw a lot of bad stuff, but it's much worse up there. Obviously, Renee Good was killed. And there was a man killed here in Chicago, too. It didn't get nearly that kind of attention. But I do think this video played a big part in it. And we need to be faster at saying this is BS. This is who this guy is. None of this is true. And you need to say it with the same fierceness and quickness, and also repeat it like they do in MAGA media. One fact check on one TV station one time cannot compete with this thing being shared by Elon Musk on Twitter.
Absolutely right. Jennifer, I have two reasons why I think that Nick Shirley's videos were done. And I think they knew that he was going to do them. And I think it was a two-pronged attack. One, to provide this racist attack on Somali immigrants with the daycare centers here. And two, was to levy another full-scale attack on child care centers so that we as Americans would then say, well, no, we don't want to give any more federal funding for childcare. And that's kind of where I was thinking that's what this was a two-pronged attack. One, to get ICE into Minneapolis. And two, their hopes, I think MAGA's hopes were, hey, if we're able to show and lie to the people with these propaganda videos how daycare centers are just stealing America's tax dollars, stealing all these hardworking Americans' tax dollars, that anybody who is out there proclaiming we need childcare for free, like Zohran Mamdani up there in New York, that this will be a good counter to that and people won't want to do it.
Yeah, I think both of those points are true. I also think it's important for people to know that Shirley was invited to Minneapolis earlier in December by the Republicans, this Minnesota Republican Party. And he went to a hearing of the Minnesota legislature led by a Minnesota representative who is running for governor, and another woman who is also running for governor sat on the committee. So there was a connection. Shirley hasn't talked about it, and I haven't seen any reporting about it, who reached out to who. But he was in Minneapolis on December 17th, and he released that video on December 26th. So, and he went to an obscure committee hearing on fraud in Minnesota. That didn't happen by accident. So there was definitely a political, two people that were running for governor of Minnesota, and Tim Walz at the time was still in the race. That was very much a part of it also.
I agree. Oh, man, there's so much that we could talk about. And we just have a few moments left. But let's talk about this MAGA media machine in another way. And it's another reason why I wanted you on, because you had an article that you released on CBS News devolving into just another pro-Trump regime, pro-billionaire propaganda arm since the Ellison family took over CBS, or Paramount Global, which is now Skydance Media. And David Ellison's first move was to put MAGA-minded Barry Weiss in charge of the news division. Of course, Weiss, the founder of the so-called anti-woke site that I've always found laughably, ironically called the Free Press.
Right.
And since Weiss took over, CBS News obviously changed immediately. And that made you write this post that was titled Goodbye Cronkite, Hello Trump. And Jennifer, you wrote here, and I like this one. You said, the new owners of CBS and their handpicked propagandists are all in on making CBS into a pro-Trump outlet, eager to spin, spike, and edit, or not, news content. So, Jennifer, was this always going to be the end game for legacy media, that if we had somebody with authoritarian goals like a Donald Trump and like the MAGA movement, that this is where legacy media would go? And by that, I mean billionaires gobbling up all these media companies, or social media companies, like you mentioned with Elon Musk. I feel like that seems to be their strategy, to do this so that way they could push not just Trump propaganda, but also like this corporate propaganda as well. What's your take?
Well, I would say that almost all the corporate media in America is owned by an oligarch. There are not many left that aren't.
Yeah.
In the case of CBS, here's how I think about it. The Ellisons are in a lot of businesses. They are not in the news business. CBS was part of a larger company that they purchased. And I think it's almost like a party favor for Donald Trump. They wrapped it up with a bow. And they didn't even have to say anything out loud. They just had to hire somebody like Barry Weiss, and there it starts to turn rightward immediately, like you said, because they need Donald Trump to be happy with them, so he will approve the other things that they're much more interested in doing. Buying big companies and having his regulatory approval for that. And so I don't think for them this is about the news at all. I think it's about, how can we keep Donald Trump happy? Oh, look, we happen to have a TV network that he despises. Yeah, let's just mess with that. That'll keep him happy. And then he'll say yes to all these other things we want in all these other realms.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that. I guess it's just one hand washes the other in a way. Yeah.
No, it's easy. Hey, what do we need to do to keep Donald Trump happy? Oh, that's easy. We need to let his people have access to our journalists and put their spin on stories. Boom.
You made a great point, too, in your story of how billionaires like the Ellisons or Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, here they are saying everybody's got to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, yet they rely on massive government contracts. So in order to make their guy in the White House happy, why not take over once respected news organizations like CBS, or turn something like Twitter into X, and almost like turn everything into what I'd even say is like a parody of what Fox News does in many ways. And I believe that's really their strategy. And it seems to me that they don't care. They don't care if they really lose money. What does it really matter to them, just as long as they stop real news reporting on Trump and, of course, on themselves? One hand washes the other.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They don't care about the ratings. They don't care that they're making all kinds of on-air technical mistakes. They don't care that their anchorman seems to be way out of his depth. No one cares about that. It's not about that. If they were serious about wanting CBS to improve or to grow or to flourish in a different way, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing with the person who they hired. It's just obvious to me that, like I said, it's like a party favor. Oh, we got this thing, we're going to tinker with it a little bit, but if we lose money, who cares? I mean, Larry Ellison is the richest man in the world, and some days he's the second richest man in the world, depending on how things go. Does he care one bit whether another 100,000 people are watching CBS News on the weekend? No, he does not.
Two quick questions just to end this. My first question is, who is going to stop this? Who?
I don't think we're going to stop it. We're going to have to do something different, because what's happening to legacy media and what's already happened in right-wing media, it's happened. And as they say, the horse is out of the barn on those. What we have to do, and we're doing, you're doing it with this podcast, is to create other forms of communication to tell truthful and accurate and meaningful stories.
Yeah, I think that leads then to my last question, since we were talking about Nick Shirley and we're talking about legacy media and how it's never going to go back to what it once was, especially during like the Walter Cronkite days or something like that. Do you believe in citizen journalism? Do you think that is the future?
I have some concerns about that, because people like Nick Shirley call themselves citizen journalists.
Right.
But I think it just depends. So like coming back to the Chicago, when ICE was here, there were people who were documenting to the best of their ability with their phones and also their eyes and their ears, because they told amazing eyewitness accounts of what they saw happening in front of them. The difference between somebody like that, who's just, I'm going to assume, horrified about what they're seeing and they want to document it, is that they're doing it for all the right reasons. Do they understand the rules of the game for journalism and how things work? They probably don't. But what happened here in Chicago is that a lot of them were then sharing it with journalists who were able then to verify a lot of the things that were recorded and said, and then add more depth to it. So I do think there's a role for that, but I think we have to be careful about the labeling, and that's kind of what set me off about Nick Shirley. I don't think everybody can call themselves a citizen journalist, because there are too many bad actors in that game. But I also don't, at the same time, want to say, please don't do it. But I think just you have to be aware that there are folks out there who are pretending to be so-called independent journalists or citizen journalists. Really what they are is propagandists, and they're doing it for nefarious political reasons.
Jennifer, thanks so much for spending time talking with us here this week and offering your insights, your expert insight into so many areas of what's happening in media and what's happening on our culture and what's happening politically around the country. It's great always having you on. Would you mind coming back on again in the future?
Love to come back anytime. You just let me know.
Jennifer Schulze, longtime Chicago journalist, and also you can check out her Substack called Indistinct Chatter. Thanks again, and we'll talk again soon, okay?
Thanks, Pat.
It's progressivism with passion. It's the Left of Lansing podcast, where Pat shines a light on Michigan's progressive movement. Contact Pat at leftoflansing@gmail.com.
Special thanks to Jennifer Schulze for being on here again. I'll provide links to her Substack called Indistinct Chatter, and I'll also provide links to the articles that we talked about wherever you are listening. But I do just want to give a quick mention that we do have some good media resources in Michigan that still do some good work, and that includes local reporters from across the state, reporters in Lansing, and yes, awesome podcasters as well, who can help fill news deserts and also bypass filtered, corporate-backed, white Christian nationalist-backed, corporate right-wing-backed news or propaganda. Plus, we've also got some awesome nonprofits like Bridge Michigan and Michigan Advance, which this week unveiled a story detailing how local activists are calling out Willow Run Airport's participation in ICE activities by allowing ICE to board kidnapped, undocumented, and maybe American citizens on planes that are destined for ICE concentration camps in Louisiana and Texas. Speaking of which, I haven't really heard Governor Whitmer say anything about this story yet, since it's happening here in her state. And that brings me to this week's Left of Lansing Last Call. Now, it's no secret that I've been critical of Governor Whitmer of late over some of her policies, including her steadfast and wrong-headed belief in granting corporations large tax breaks and large incentives, which haven't yielded any real benefit to Michigan workers. But I've also been flabbergasted by her reticence to stick up for working-class Michiganders, democracy, and decency during the first year of the Trump regime. And I'm not the only one. Listen to this clip from the Still Socials podcast called Point of Disorder, featuring Adrian, Julie, and Norris from last week. The one doing most of the talking in this clip is Adrian, and I think she speaks for a lot of us here. Listen.
I'm just so ready for a change. I just can't, I'm so disappointed in her.
I'm just interested, she's been so silent over all of these issues, including Venezuela, really including
ICE,
the situation with ICE.
I can't lie, I thought she was still in Japan for a minute.
That was months ago.
I thought she was still there. That's how little we've heard from her.
But also, where are you on these other huge, giant, terrible things that are happening to us? We all know it's the worst kept secret that she's going to run for president. The playbook is there. We know exactly the writing is on the wall. You got to stand up and actually talk about these things. And it's kind of the same with Ford of Ford. I can't think of his name.
I keep wanting to say is Bill Clay Ford.
Bill. It's one of the Bills.
I think it's Bill Ford.
It's a William.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's kind of the same thing where your non-response is the response. And because I've had a lot of people who've weighed in, who've said, oh, she's got to do what she's got to do to protect Michigan and all of that. We still got kids being taken that are in high school and younger by ICE in our communities. That's happening right now in Michigan. Just because they're
under her watch.
Under her watch.
Yeah.
Just
still
because
her administration.
They're not ramping up ICE raids here like they are in Minneapolis doesn't mean that it's not happening here in Detroit, Saginaw, Flint, Grand Rapids, across the state. So I want to know where you're at on this, because we got a Democratic primary that's going to be here before you know it. And if you are going to run for president, as of right now, I can't vote for you.
Now, I did a little editing there for time purposes, and Adrian, I did take out your rather effective F-bomb at one point. I'm sorry about that, but it's the old radio guy in me. But her point is precisely what I think is the upsetting part of Whitmer in this second running of the Trump regime's authoritarianism. I mean, what happened to that woman from Michigan? Well, she did fly out to Davos, Switzerland for that pro-corporate World Economic Forum with other governors and told the press there that she's got a complicated relationship with dear leader, saying that she disagrees with him 95% of the time. I'd love to know what the 5% is. Now, it's no secret Whitmer's been MIA for the last year as this country goes into a free fall, although she did give an interview with NPR's Steve Inskeep last week at the Detroit Auto Show, and in that interview, Whitmer did say that it's not paranoia to believe the regime's homeland security will try to influence voting. I think she means intimidate voters. And she did say that the regime is abusing its power in many different realms. However, when asked by Steve Inskeep if these abuses of power make it difficult to work with the regime, Whitmer said that she's always worked with people she's disagreed with and that working for Michiganders on getting stuff done is her North Star. Oh, yes. Now, Whitmer concluded that she'd still make her feelings known and her values known because that's what a leader should do. Well, I agree with her on that last part, but that's not exactly what she's doing at all. Kind of like when she put the folder over her face at the White House, Whitmer's been hiding from the press, especially the Lansing press of late, and has been silent as the ICE Gestapo terrorizes Minneapolis or when it terrorized Chicago. And while we don't have as many agents in Michigan as Adrian said, it's happening here. And like Adrian said on that Point of Disorder podcast, don't think for a second that we couldn't see something like Minneapolis happen in some blue city in Michigan. All it takes is one incident, or all it takes is one disagreement, and boom. Now, look, I'll be fair. I think Whitmer's doing some things that are smart, like speaking out against Trump's tariffs or trade war with Canada, which is crippling Michigan, or making immunizations readily available for kids and families. That's good. Or even pushing for geologic hydrogen. So look, I try to be fair here, all right? That's what I try to do. But authoritarianism is taking over. And to barely say anything, to barely show a spine, to barely show these values, to refuse to join the plurality of Americans in saying that ICE must be abolished, and to not call out the regime's blocking or slowing down of the release of the Epstein files, I mean, that's sinful and it's downright disgraceful. I mean, to refuse to use the bully pulpit, which is what a politician with power like Governor Whitmer is supposed to do, to refuse to use that bully pulpit to show working class Americans that you're with them on a daily basis is gross misconduct for someone purporting to be a leader and to believe in democracy. And for all of her work to persuade dear leader to be nice to Michigan, the regime refused to grant much-needed dollars for ice storm victims in northern Michigan, many of whom voted for Trump. This is not the time for calmness and longing for the days of corporate political bipartisanship. This is about the future of the Democratic Party, and more importantly, this is about the future of the country. Whitmer's silence, while the people suffer under this corporate authoritarianism rule, is inexcusable and it is deafening. As Ella Wheeler Cox said, to sin by silence when we should protest makes cowards out of men.
You're listening to Left of Lansing. Music for the show and everything else on Left of Lansing is provided by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project and complete music archives, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site or subscribe to Space Leopard on YouTube. Now, back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
That's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. Thanks again to Jennifer Schulze for being on the show. It's always a blast when she's on. And don't forget to visit Left of Lansing on the YouTube. And thanks for all the likes on my video short on MAGA Michigan Congresswoman Lisa McClain's insider trading scandal. Yeah, a new one. And I have to say, I love getting comments from MAGA types on YouTube saying that I'm just resorting to propaganda by, reporting the facts. Damn those facts. Yeah, I know. Facts are terrible things. And so is Lisa McClain, come to think of it. Email me your thoughts and criticisms at leftoflansing@gmail.com. Please stay warm for the next week, and please make sure your pets are warm and protected. Why do I feel like Bob Barker all of a sudden? Until next time, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan!
You've been listening to Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Left of Lansing was produced by Pat Johnston, brainstormed by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and yes, hosted by Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. Thanks to our good friend Rich for website assistance, and thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. We thank Audio Boom for publishing the podcast every week. Visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast, and we'll talk with you again next week.